The last thing my mother ever called me in public was a defect. She said it in a stone ballroom with 200 guests watching at my sister's wedding, while I stood there holding a glass of champagne I never asked for. Why is this defect here? That was her opening line after 9 years of silence. My sister turned from her photographer, saw my face, and smiled the way you smile at a stain on a rented tablecloth. "You are not invited," she hissed. She was right about that. She just didn't know who was. My family had 9 years to learn who I'd become, and they spent every one of them pretending I was never born. What the groom did next didn't just ruin an evening. It brought down a dynasty 3 generations in the making, and I never once raised my voice. But this doesn't start in that ballroom. It starts 10 years earlier, at a country club, under a wall of framed diplomas that held one empty frame. My name is Grace Whitfield. I'm 28. And before I tell you how that ballroom fell apart, you need to understand the wall. In my parents' house hangs a corridor of 11 frames. My grandfather's medical degree, my mother's cardiology boards, my father's anesthesiology fellowship. A century of Dixons and Chases in mahogany and glass. We called it the wall, capital W, the way other families say the lake house. At Sunday dinners, my mother asked each of us what we'd achieved that week, and the answers were graded like lab results. My sister Vivian, 4 years older, always had numbers ready: class rank, test scores, science fair placements. She was the investment that performed. I was the other kind of child. I could splint a bird's wing and rebandage my grandmother's shin, but I froze in academic competitions. My mother never screamed about it. Screaming was for families without standards. She simply adjusted my portion of her attention downward, the way you'd rebalance a portfolio. The summer I turned 14, a 12th frame appeared at the bottom of the wall. Empty. When I asked what it was for, my mother smiled like a loan officer and said, "It's yours, pending." 10 years ago, the week I graduated high school, my mother booked the country club's garden room, reserved for announcements, not celebrations, which should have warned me. Between the salad and the entree, she stood, tapped her glass, and announced Vivian's acceptance to medical school, top choice, full scholarship. The room rose like it had been rehearsed. Then, almost as an afterthought, she tapped her glass again. "And of course, we should say something about Grace." Every face turned. "One daughter got the Dixon mind," she said, warm as a scalpel, gesturing at Vivian. Then the pause, her real weapon. "The other got well." We celebrate what there is to celebrate. A few people laughed the hollow laugh people give a boss's joke. I sat there with chocolate cake on my fork and 18 years of training in my spine, and I gave her nothing. No tears, no scene. Later, when the family photos went up on the mantle, I wasn't cropped out of the group shot. I'd been composed out from the start. My mother had arranged the pose herself. When I told her I wasn't going to medical school, something behind her eyes closed like a till. "Then it will hang empty," she said, "and everyone who visits will know why." That night, my grandmother Ruth found me on the porch swing. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, night shifts, wound care, the unglamorous end of medicine her own husband's framed career had been built on top of. She unbuckled the steel watch from her wrist, the one she'd timed 1,000 pulses with, and clasped it onto mine. "40 years I wore that," she said. It's seen more people through the worst night of their lives than everyone at that dinner combined. And it never once asked anyone their class rank. Then, "Nobody earns love, honey." She stopped there. I wouldn't hear the rest of that sentence for 10 more years. 10 months later, they threw me out. My college fund, $80,000, had been quietly reallocated to Vivian's tuition. "An investment goes where the return is," my mother said from the doorway, like she was reading a weather report. I'd already seen it coming. I'd opened my own bank account, finished a CNA certification at night, started picking up shifts at a home care agency. My mother could survive a daughter who failed toward medicine. She could not survive one who succeeded toward the help. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday: quit the agency and resume the family trajectory, or leave the family home. I packed in 40 minutes. 2 trash bags, my certification folder, Ruth's watch. "You're choosing to be nobody," my mother said at the door. "I'm choosing to be somebody you don't get to grade," I told her and walked out. The porch light went off before I reached the sidewalk, which brings us back to that ballroom, 9 years later, the champagne, my mother's opening line. Up close she looked expensive and tired, 9 years having silvered her hair and sharpened everything else. Vivian arrived in a cloud of tulle and panic. "You are not invited. Whatever this is, you will not do this today." "Congratulations," I said, and meant it, which annoyed her more than anything I could have engineered. Guests were starting to drift our way. And my mother, always exquisitely tuned to an audience, reorganized her face into hostess warmth and steered me toward a side room like she was giving me a tour. My father was already waiting there, which told me the whole scene had been cast before the curtain rose. 4 decades of putting people to sleep for a living, 1 decade doing it to himself. He looked at me for the first time since the trash bags and said exactly one thing: "Use the kitchen door. There's a service corridor. Don't make your mother repeat herself." Not my name. Not "how are you." I'd spent 9 years telling myself he was the gentle one, the hostage. I finally understood his silence had never been a hostage's silence. It was a shareholder's. He voted with her every time. He just let her read the minutes. "No," I said, and meant it in every direction I owned. To understand what I did next, you need the years in between. After they threw me out, I became a home care aide, $11 an hour, timing medications by Ruth's watch, learning to shave a face that flinched. My family called it wiping strangers. What it actually was: holding a man's dignity in my 2 hands for 8 hours a night and never dropping it. I kept a notebook of everything my agency did wrong, and every entry became a rule for later. Then, the fall I turned 23, Ruth had a stroke. I found out 2 days late, from a neighbor, because no one in my family called me. By the time I reached the hospice, my mother, her medical power of attorney, had already curated the visitor list, and I wasn't on it. I stood at the reception desk in my scrubs while a kind woman checked a clipboard and told me, "I'm sorry, family only." 11 days later, Ruth died. I learned about the funeral after it was already over. But Ruth had gotten one thing past the clipboard: a voicemail, 41 seconds long, left a week before the stroke. I played it the night I learned she was gone, and made it exactly 12 seconds before my thumb hit stop like a reflex, because her voice was alive, and I wasn't ready for the past tense. I kept that voicemail 5 years, never once let it finish. Grief either buries you or it pours a foundation. 6 months later, I took $12,000 out of savings and a coffee can, rented a 2-room office, and started my own home care agency. I named it Brightwater, nothing to do with my family, just the opposite of a hallway full of frames. My hiring policy was one sentence: hire the ones who show up. 5 years later, Brightwater had over 300 caregivers across 3 states, and I had a title I still can't say without hearing my 19-year-old self laugh: founder and president. One Tuesday, a hospital called about a patient no other agency would touch. The surgeon himself got on the phone, testing whether we were as good as our reputation. I said both, and he laughed once, like a door unsticking. That was Dr. Daniel Whitfield, the hospital's senior trauma surgeon, 32 at the time. He noticed Ruth's watch on my wrist and asked whose it had been. Nobody in 8 years had asked me that. 2 years later, we married in his mother's backyard, 30 guests, a barbecue. I mailed my parents an invitation anyway. 2 weeks later, it came back, opened, read, resealed in my mother's handwriting, one line in blue ink on the back: "Don't embarrass yourself." I kept that envelope in a cedar box with Ruth's watch. Every December after, I still mailed a plain Christmas card, signed Grace, never answered, swallowed by the same mailbox that had spat my wedding back at me. 2 years ago, the hospital came to Brightwater with a proposal: a founding sponsorship for a new geriatric medicine fellowship. I had one condition: it would be named the Ruth Chase Fellowship, after a nurse who worked 40 years of nights and never got a frame on anyone's wall. My own name would appear nowhere. The first Ruth Chase Fellow was selected that spring, a young internist with good hands and better manners, the kind of doctor who learns every caregiver's name. His name was Eric Halston. I funded a stranger's future and told no one. This spring, that stranger sent me a wedding invitation because he was marrying my sister. So there I was, at table 2, groom's side, family adjacent, engraved place card reading Dr. and Mrs. Whitfield, while across the room my mother read the seating chart, and for exactly half a second, lost control of her own face. She didn't know who Whitfield was. For 9 years, she'd never once wondered about me, and now the answer was seated close enough to share a bread basket with the head table. The groom's mother, Dr. Susan Halston, chief of medicine, found me first, hand already extended. Eric talks about Brightwater like it's a teaching hospital, she said warmly. Then with genuine curiosity, so how do you know our Vivian? I had one honest sentence sitting right there, she's my sister, ask her why you've never heard of me. I could have detonated the whole wedding right there between courses. Instead, I chose the smallest true thing in the room. We grew up in the same town. Susan Halston filed something away behind one raised eyebrow and moved on. Vivian cornered me by the coat check the second she could, fingers around my wrist like a blood pressure cuff, bridal smile collapsing the instant we cleared the doorway. Whatever you told her, walk it back. I asked her the only question I'd actually come for, what did you tell them happened to me? There is no story, she said. You don't exist. As far as the Halstons know, I'm an only child. I'd braced for a villain's edit, addiction, theft, some dramatic smear. The truth was cleaner and colder. They hadn't buried me. They'd never dug the hole. I was an entry simply dropped from the books. Her hands were shaking. Not wedding jitters shaking, hospice clipboard shaking. And her eyes kept flicking not toward our mother, but toward Eric. A woman defending one lie is annoyed. A woman defending a lie built on top of another lie is terrified. I let her go back inside, thinking I'd chosen the quiet exit, migraine, coat, husband, highway. Then Ruth's watch caught on my sleeve at the coat check. And I thought about a woman who walked through that family's front door for 6 decades in a nurse's cardigan, and never once used the service entrance they kept offering her. We stayed for the toasts. My mother rose first in pearl gray and gave the performance of her career. 2 great medical families joining, standards upheld across generations, and her signature line, delivered like scripture. Everything in this family is earned. Nothing is given away free at our table. 200 glasses rose to it. I heard, for the first time, the sentence underneath her sentence. She wasn't quoting herself. She was reciting something her own father once grated into her. Then Eric stood. He thanked his parents, thanked his bride, and then went off script to thank the 2 people who'd made him the doctor standing there. My mentor, Dr. Daniel Whitfield, table 2. Every Dixon head turned like gun turrets. Then, and the founder of the fellowship that paid my way through training. She wouldn't let the hospital print her name. It took me 2 years to find out who she was. Grace Whitfield, her grandmother, was Ruth Chase. Grace, would you stand? I stood, because you stand when a good man asks. Across the room, my mother rose too, not to applaud. Her face had gone the gray of old snow. There's been a mix-up, she said, hostess laugh bolted on top. Grace is a distant relation. And Vivian, losing 9 years of message discipline in one blurt, shouted straight into the silence. You are not invited. Eric turned to his bride slowly. The way you turn in a house, where something just broke upstairs. Not invited, I invited her. This is the woman who paid for my fellowship. Her grandmother's name is on my diploma wall. Do you have any idea who this is? My mother reached for rank one last time. This is a family matter, and Eric asked, quietly, the question that finished her. Which family? Susan Halston rose without hurry and looked at my sister with the stillness of a diagnosis arriving. Vivian, you told us you were an only child. Nobody answered. That was the answer. My mother crossed to me through the frozen tables and took my forearm with both hands. calibrated now to reach exactly the first 3 rows. Grace, darling, will discuss family matters privately. Darling. 9 years, a returned invitation, a hospice clipboard with my name missing, and I'd graduated to darling in under a minute, now that there were witnesses worth performing for. I smiled at her the way you smile at someone shouting about a stop they've already missed, and said, quiet enough for only those rows. You have no idea, do you? About anything after April. Then I lifted her hands off my arm, firmly, without negotiation, and walked toward the terrace. She followed. And in the stone corridor, with no audience left to perform for, she finally dropped it. Here's what happens now, she said, breathing like the air had gotten expensive. You come back inside. Say we've always been close, quiet, private. The frame gets filled. You finally earned your place. There it was, the door I'd wanted at 19, thrown wide open at last, with everything arranged inside it like a table set for one. All it would cost was one lie, and lying was the family's native language. I'd simply refused the apprenticeship. I looked at her trembling hands, the fine tremor that had ended her surgical career years before. The one she'd buried by becoming the family's judge instead of its performer, and for one breath I felt something dangerously close to pity. My father made me recite my class rank every Sunday until I left for college, she said. I gave you a family that keeps score because it's the only kind I was ever given, and it worked. Look at Vivian. We both heard it land over a ballroom where Vivian's marriage was currently in cardiac arrest. Back inside, Susan Halston asked me straight, physician to physician, in front of both families, Grace, before anything else is said tonight, is it true? Were you part of this family? My mother's whole scripted answer was radiating off her shoulder. I could have unloaded everything I knew, Vivian's shaking hands, the residency that had quietly ended 2 years early, all of it. Instead, I said only what was mine to say. I was born a Dixon. When I was 19, I was told that in this family, love is earned, and I stopped earning it. I haven't spoken to them in 9 years. Eric, you married someone tonight. Ask her gently for the rest. It isn't mine to tell. Then I turned to my mother and answered her offer. No, the frame stays empty. I built my own wall. I took Daniel's arm and walked out through the center of the aisle. Just before the doors closed behind us, I heard one champagne glass hit the parquet. Outside in the cold spring dark, my hands finally started shaking, the honest kind, the kind you've earned. I opened Ruth's voicemail one more time. 12 seconds in, my thumb had always stopped. This time it didn't. And I need you to hear this, honey, because nobody ever told your mother, so she never learned how to say it to you. And somebody in this family has to go first. Nobody earns love, honey. Love is the thing they can't bill you for. You were never the empty frame, Gracie. You were the whole wall and the house it holds up. Come see me Sunday. Bring nothing. I cried on that terrace, in my husband's jacket, for the first and only time that night, not for the family I'd lost, because you can't lose what was never issued to you, but for the woman who'd gone first, and for the 19-year-old at the mailbox who could have used those 41 seconds a little sooner. The dynasty spent the next 6 weeks collapsing without any help from me. The Halstons quietly checked the chart behind the wedding. Vivian's dermatology practice had no lease and no license. Her residency hadn't paused. It had ended, unfinished, and the years since had been narrated over by our mother. Eric filed for annulment within 6 weeks, kindly, and kept the Ruth Chase Fellowship name on his email signature, which undid me a little. My mother resigned her hospital gala chairmanship that fall, citing family obligations. Nobody had to fire her. Her currency had simply stopped clearing in the only rooms she'd ever built her life inside. My father sent one email in November, no subject, one line, your grandmother would have been proud. I read it 30 times, I never answered. Both things are true, and I've stopped needing them to fight. The wall back home still hangs, 11 frames, one empty, 2.5 hours from my kitchen. Nobody took it down. Systems like that don't come down. They just lose jurisdiction, one escaped person at a time. In my own dining room there are 11 frames too. I counted them once and laughed, until Daniel came to check on me. They hold a fiddle recital, a fishing boat, a coffee can, 2 backyard wedding photos, and a nurse in her cardigan on a porch swing, mid-sentence, saying something the camera couldn't keep. Not one certificate. Ruth's watch stays on my wrist. The voicemail is still on my phone. These days, I can play it all the way through while the potatoes boil. If a family ever made you audition for a seat at their table, hear this. Love that has to be earned was never love. It was a job with no wages, and you're allowed to quit a job. The table you build afterward will hold every person your old chairs never fit.